Right, are you all ready for the next section? Okay, so I'm going to ask Danielle to come back to say for 10 or 15 minutes. She can read a bit more from that story that had us all captive, and a little bit of something else, and then we'll go on to the open mic. Okay, Danielle.
Very good. Sprint across. Yeah.
Okay, so hello again, everyone.
Hello.
So I'm going to read a little bit more from the same story. Okay, just find the place where I start. Okay, so they're looking at the poster now. That's where we're joining them. This is our man, Coleman said, pointing to the top left-hand corner. This is the fellow that did for the dinosaurs. The boy was on tiptoe, gazing in wonder at the poster. He touched a finger to the thing Coleman had indicated, a flaming ball of rock trailing dust and comets. Did it only hit planet Earth? Yes, his grandfather said. Wasn't that enough? So there could still be dinosaurs on other planets. No, Coleman said. At exactly the same time, Pavel said, very likely. The boy turned to Pavel. Really? I don't see why not, Pavel said. There are millions of other galaxies and billions of other planets. I bet there are lots of other dinosaurs, maybe lots of other people too. Like aliens, the boy said. Yes, aliens, if you want to call them that, Pavel said, although they might be very like us. Coleman lifted the books from the ends of the poster, and it rolled back into itself with a slap of dust. He handed it to Oisin, then returned the rest of the things to the box, closed down the cardboard flaps. Okay, Sonny, he said, let's put this back under the stairs. And the boy followed him out of the kitchen, the poster tucked under his arm like a musket. After dinner that evening, Kate refused all offers of help. She sent everyone to the sitting room to play cards, while she cleared the table and took the dishes to the sink. 3 red lights shone down from the mountain, the nighttime lights of the wind turbines, a warning to aircraft. She filled the sink with soapy water and watched the bubbles form psychedelic honeycombs, millions and millions of tiny domes glittering on the dirty plates. That night, their first to share a bed in almost a year, Coleman undressed in front of her as if she wasn't there. Just to explain a little bit about the background to this, Coleman has taken to sleeping in their son's former bedroom, which has become a spare room. So he's taken sleeping there, but she has moved him out of that room because they have visitors now. So this is the first time in almost a year that he's back in what was their bedroom. Okay, so that night, their first to share a bed in almost a year, Coleman undressed in front of her as if she wasn't there. He matter-of-factly removed his shirt and trousers, folded them on a chair and put on his pajamas. She found herself appraising his body as she might a stranger's. Here, without the backdrop of forest and mountain, without the axe in his hand, she saw that he was old, saw the way the muscles of his legs had wasted and the grey of his chest hair. But she was not repulsed by any of these things, she simply noted them. She got her nightdress from under her pillow and began to unbutton her blouse. On the 3rd button, she found she could go no further and went out to the bathroom to undress there. Her figure had not entirely deserted her. Her breasts, when she cupped them, were shrunken, but she was slim, and her legs, which she'd always been proud of, were still shapely. Thus far, age had not delivered its estrangement of skin from bone. Her thighs and stomach were firm, with none of the sagginess, the falling away that sometimes happened. She had not suffered the collapse that befell other women, rendering them unrecognisable as the girls they had been in their youth, though perhaps that was yet to come, for she was still only 52. When she returned to the bedroom, Coleman was reading a newspaper. She peeled back the duvet on her side and got into bed. He glanced in her direction but continued to read. It was quiet in the room, only the rattle of the newspaper, a dog barking somewhere on the mountain. She read a few pages of a novel but couldn't concentrate. "I thought I might take the boy fishing tomorrow," he said. She put down her book. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she said. "He's had a busy day today. I was thinking of driving to town, taking him to the cinema." "He can go to the cinema in London." "We'll see tomorrow," she said, and took up her book again. Coleman put away the newspaper and switched off the lamp on his side. He settled his head on the pillow, but immediately sat up again, plumping the pillow, turning it over until he had it to his liking. She switched off the other lamp, lay there in the dark, careful where she placed her legs, her arms, readjusting to the space available to her. A door opened and closed. She heard footsteps on the landing, then another door opening, closing. After a while she heard small muffled noises, then a repetitive thudding, a headboard against a wall. The sound would be heard too in Emer's old bedroom where the boy was now alone. She thought of him waking in the night among those peculiar paintings, dozens of ravens with elongated necks, strange hybrid creatures, half bird, half human. She imagined specks of paint coming loose, falling in a black ash upon the boy as he slept. Coleman was curled away from her, facing the wall. She looked at him as the thudding grew louder. He was utterly quiet, so quiet she could barely discern the sound of his breathing, and she knew immediately that he was awake, for throughout their marriage he had always been a noisy sleeper. Okay, I think I'll leave that one there. I can either time it out of a different story, or did you want to move on?
Yeah, I know it. A little bit out of just a little bit out.
Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit of a story that's called A Different Country, and it was published in Stingray magazine in, let me see, the winter 2013 issue. This is a story that's set up in the Inishowen Peninsula, which is where my husband is from. So it's a story where it's fiction, but I've drawn on various bits of, I suppose, of my own experiences in writing the story. Okay, and I don't need to give you any introduction to this one because I'm going to read from the very beginning of the story. Okay. A Different Country. At Kinnago, the light was silver, the sea and sky grey, and the wind that snatched at her breath had a sharp, almost metallic edge. Any time he had spoken of this place, he had always spoken of the light, and now, early morning, the beach deserted, she understood what he meant. They had travelled from Dublin the day before, but had left late, then stopped too long in Derry, so that it was dusk before they drove north along the Foyle. The sea was already slipping into darkness then, the cabin lights of a boat carried like a lamp up the estuary. And as they passed through Quigley's Point, Moville, Greencastle, small dark shapes cut the air above the water, birds perhaps, or bats from the trees that grew along the shore road. Waking that morning in his brother's bungalow, she had pulled back the bedroom curtains to get a proper look at the sea, and had found herself staring at a concrete wall, roughly plastered, set no more than 3 or 4 feet back from the house. Beneath the window, filling the space between it and the wall, was a tangle of orange netting, 6 crudely cut lengths of galvanise, and a stack of plastic boxes stamped with the logo of a fisherman's co-op. "It's a boat shed," he said from the bed, and she had turned to see him raised on one elbow, watching her in amusement. "But why here?" she said, gesturing in disbelief to the wall. "Why block out the sea, the light?" It was cold in the bedroom, her breath misting the glass as she leaned closer to the window. The net held remnants of the sea, strips of black leathery seaweed, thin as bootlaces, and a handful of barnacles. "Imagine," she said, conscious of his eyes on her as she shivered in her nightdress, "imagine what a view like that would be worth in Howth." He had laughed, patting the pillow next to him. "You're not in Kansas now, Dorothy," he said, and as she climbed back under the blankets, he put his hand on the jut of her hip and pulled her close. They drove to Kinnigo first thing after breakfast, before anyone else was up. They parked at the top of a rocky headland, and as she stepped out of the car, the wind almost pulled the door from her grasp. Below them, the bay lay wide and empty, the cliffside a tangle of green, bushy vegetation sloping to the water. She held his hand as they descended the steep path to the beach. "A ship from the Spanish Armada was wrecked here," he said, putting an arm around her waist to steady her. "An old Venetian trading ship converted for battle." She stopped and tucked her hair down the back of her jacket to keep it from blowing about her face. "Did many people drown?" He nodded. "Aye, and the locals ate the ones that didn't, or so we were told as children." "That's a myth, obviously," she said. "Wait until you've met the locals." "You're a local," she said. But already he had dislodged her from the crook of his arm and was striding ahead of her across the sand, over to the tidal pools where rocks, black and sleek, broke the surface of the water. A dog was loose on the beach, a long-haired black and white creature, and now it came tearing across the sand towards her, its ears flat to its head, its tail swinging like a rudder. It skidded to a halt in front of her, and opening its mouth, dropped something at her feet. "What's that you've got for me?" she said. It was a crab, the shell a buttermilk colour, with a sprinkling of green like mildew, and a darker green along its scalloped rim. It wriggled as she held it between thumb and forefinger, its greyish legs slow and jerky like the legs of the old men in bathing trunks at the 40-foot on Christmas mornings. She tapped the shell, and the crab stopped wriggling, drew its legs up into its belly. The dog leaped in the air, snapping at the crab. "Now I get it," she said. "You want me to throw it." The dog whined, skittered back and forth on the sand. "That wouldn't be very nice, would it?" she said. She held the crab above her head with one hand, ruffling the dog's ears with the other. The dog barked. "You don't understand, do you?" she said. She walked to the edge of the waves and, bending down, released the crab into the water. The dog yelped and tore into the spray. When the crab was carried back in on the next wave, he seized it and dropped it again at her feet. "No," she said, snatching it up. "Bad dog." The shell was slimy with dog slobber, and a crack had appeared, running top to bottom. This time she took a couple of steps into the sea, her new suede boots wet to above the ankle, ice-cold water seeping through to her socks. She flung the crab as far as she could in a high curved arc, and once again the dog charged after it. She was coming out of the waves, her boots heavy with water. Ruined, she thought. The salt would ruin them. They would never be the same. When she saw Jonathan walking towards her, his shoulders hunched against the wind. His stride was long and easy, and he had his hands in his pockets, his hair blown back from his forehead. He reached her just as the dog emerged from the sea, dripping and victorious, and deposited the crab at his feet. "What's this?" he said. "Some sort of Dublin pastime. We mostly use sticks here." He tried to kiss her, but she pushed him away and bent to pick up the crab. The dog retched a couple of times, then coughed up something small and grey, and she saw that it was a crab leg. "Scram," she said to the dog, and she stamped her foot. "Shoo, go home." But the dog just barked and hurled himself at her, almost knocking her over. The crab was split open, pearly white flesh visible where the shell was lifting away from the body. 2 legs were missing, another hanging from a sliver of tissue. She handed the crab to Jonathan. "You throw it," she said. "It needs to go further out." He inspected the crab as it lay motionless on his palm. He poked it with his finger, but still it didn't move. "I'm afraid it no longer has any needs," he said. He tossed it over his shoulder, where it shattered against some rocks, and the dog was away like a rocket, snuffling around in shallow pools after bits of shell, pieces of leg. The tires spun on wet grass as she reversed the car onto the road, and they headed back towards Greencastle, past the lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper's cottage, past an old schoolhouse, converted now, hanging baskets straggling with last summer's flowers. Looking down at the beach, she glimpsed a streak of black and white, the dog darting back and forth along the water's edge. Though it was autumn, the cliffside was still lush with greenery, fuchsia bright in the ditches, heathers blooming rust and orange in the bogs beyond. It was almost too beautiful, she thought, the colours too pure, the light too fantastical. It was as if she was driving through the landscape of a computer game, the steering wheel her console, and the walls of the 2 white cottages might crumble as she passed, revealing dark, monstrous creatures with the gristle of Spanish sailors between their teeth. She glanced at Jonathan in the passenger seat beside her, and for a moment she did not know him, and Dublin, her home, the university, all seemed very far away. And I'm going to leave that there. Thank you.
Lovely.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much.